Okay, hello everyone. I wanted to make an announcement that I may be taking some time to focus on the library, Mr. Within's library, project Mr. Within's library, and these talks may not be as regular as they are, but they will still keep coming. Anyways, for today's episode, I thought of speaking about something that is very important, and I feel every person has their own cultivation of this title. But I think one of the most important things that a human being can do is to become comfortable with their own solitude in the universe. So this episode is dedicated, and in some sense a sort of command to the species and to everybody, to become comfortable with your universal solitude. If I was to explain solitude, I would say that the human being is born alone. And this is something really the Buddha says: the human being is born alone and the human being dies alone. And companionship in the middle of this companionship is a blessing. But everybody is born alone. And what's more even astonishing than that is that we are born with, you can say, two sets of eyes. We are born with the view of our eyes. Pretty much it's as if two types of sight, but one pair of eyes. In front of our eyes, we are alone in the universe as the human species on a rock in the middle of nowhere. And behind our eyes, we are alone with ourselves. You know, in physics they suggest that you look at the simpler principles of a system, of anything, and then from those simple principles, upon observing the moment, it will eventually become complex. And when I think about living on this planet, I think about really it's as if living with others, living with ourselves, and living with the world, as if three simultaneous dimensions. You know, our mind is alone. That means people can communicate to one another, but regardless of how much we communicate, we will never understand each other in the same way that we're understanding ourselves. And so pretty much, if I'm just thinking right now, all the types of solitude there are, you know. One can be in some sense alone in the past, and in the future end up becoming, you know, no longer alone, but still the memory of their loneliness could be an experience of loneliness for them, an experience of solitude. You know, for the longest time, this creature was alone. It had no conscious mind. It had no concept of the other. So pretty much it was the world moving. Then a body separate to the world began moving. And in some sense, the body became conscious of itself. And even consciousness is a solo act, right? That means when a person opens their eyes in the morning and they're conscious of a universe, it's as if every person is starting from their brain. So we are, by the nature of our design, in the inner realms alone. In the outer realms, we cannot be alone. In the inner realms, when I say we're alone, that means the true nature of thought is non-dual, the true nature of mind. And when it's non-dual, there is no individual, so there is no loneliness or some sort of solitude or isolation for them. In a strange way, when I look at numbers, if I could take the episode here, you see the concept of isolation, the concept of solitude, the concept of a person being alone with the universe or alone as the universe. It requires the concept one. And so, it's as if like first there's the concept one, and after the concept one can in some sense become absent, there can be the concept zero. You can totally see, I think this was the case actually in history, where number zero was invented after number one. And so imagine the first person being like, what do we get when we subtract one from one? Just like numbers stand on their own, human beings stand on their own. Sometimes I look at, the human species, and I tell myself, like, if we wanted a dictionary of human psychology, there's so many different types of human beings on this planet. And by the nature of each of us having a different DNA, we are technically alone in our perception. Agreement is the miracle. We experience everything on this planet actually alone. It's only when there's others that we're not alone, when there's other minds or poetically other souls in the realm. Survival, as if every person had a personal dimension and an impersonal dimension. The personal dimension, there is nothing other than ourselves. That means if a person looks at the world and closes their eyes and continues to see a changing world, that world is all you. There can be a solitude, a universal solitude, in the sense of there's an individual object alone in the universe. There could be a universal solitude, where there's a singular subject alone in the universe. You can say the concept of cosmos is standing alone. You can say the concept of God is alone. That means the state of God, or in mystical traditions as they explain it, it's like it's non-dual. What that means is it's like when the world is one moment, there are no parts to it, there are no others, right? So it's kind of like, if we want to think in the realm of bodies, yeah, there's individuals, we're not alone. If we want to think of the realms of the mind, as long as the minds are identifying as individuals, then the minds are not alone. But if the mind realizes, like imagine if the whole species in the future realizes there's some sort of field of intelligence where we're all connected to, and this whole time, even though we have been living individually, it's actually been particles moving inside one collective field. You know, and just because a person can become comfortable with something doesn't mean, it's like emotionally, it suffices, It's like, the body is actually alone in the mind. The mind is alone in the inner witness, or the attributeless internal witness. Some people call this the soul. And if the concept of numerology in regards to there being more than one thing, that means if we are taking the notion that how would I say it? It's as if, like, if objects, we can apply numerology to it, see different objects. Let's say you see 5 objects, or 5 senses. Then we have the mind. The mind, I would say, it's a sort of duality. But I would say the mind can still be seen as more than one mind, or we see the contents of the mind. But when it comes to the concept of the soul is neither alone, and it is neither, how can I tell you? It's as if like something that is neither separate and neither joined. It's as if something that is not an object or subject cannot be alone. A subject can be alone. Look, the concept of universal solitude, I would say. And of course I'm saying I'm interchanging solitude and loneliness, but they're not the same, guys. You can say solitude doesn't have emotion in it. Solitude is kind of like when you realize, yeah, I'm inside a universe. Or not rather inside it, but I am part of this existential event that we call life. I don't know how many people have tried this. I mean, I think everybody's tried it, but like before we fall asleep, there's that moment where we close our eyes, and so there is no light coming in, and the person's there alone with their mind. That's a level of solitude that is so crucial to become content with, because if a person is not content with the solitude in their outer realms, they will not be content with the solitude in their inner realms. And if they're not content with the solitude in their inner realms, they in some sense cannot function in their outer realms. Just like when I'm speaking right now, I have to be conscious that there's silence first, and just like an orchestra, like the concepts begin to arise. Once we have accepted what we are and its nature, then life doesn't become a search anymore. It becomes work. You know, you only search until you find. But after you find, let's say so many people are searching for enlightenment, but let us wonder about post-enlightenment, not pre-enlightenment. Pre-enlightenment, the person is searching to not be alone, to find that a truth behind the veil. But post-enlightenment, as if there is, it's another way of saying somebody who's skydived and somebody who hasn't skydived. Somebody who's skydived, they have a content. They are not looking to skydive anymore. They have experienced it, right? So it's the equivalent to a person who experiences a moment where they're alone with the universe. If you can totally accept that, it becomes equivalent to the person who's skydived rather than wants to skydive, you know. Because whatever we do in this life, we cannot avoid how energy is just being present. We don't know the nature of the mind. We know that there is a brain, and somehow this brain animates the moment we wake up into a sphere around the body, a sphere of awareness. This sphere of awareness is containing our body. So you can say, in some sense, man's loneliness or man's universal solitude is how the mind, like a candle flame, is illuminating the dark room. So what that means is intelligence is not just in the human body. That means that there were intelligent phenomena occurring on this planet before we were born. But the moment the human being is born, they are their own intelligent occurrence. So you can say human psychology is an event, is you can say a multidimensional natural event taking place in a very or a specific natural event taking place in a general natural event. Right? It's as if, right, when I look at the world right now, I see that the planet is alone. You know, I see that we're alone in this universe. There is the other planets are not, in some sense, they have no species on them. You know, it's only us here in the solar system. So it's as if we have to not only be able to accept our solitude, but once we accept it, we can begin to explore reality. We can begin to see the new dimensions of life. And I will tell you, it's one of the hardest things in this world. Because we're conditioned to be a social animal, we never consider it until the last breath, you know, that really from the beginning we have been alone. And so it is the privilege of a multidimensional system where we find others. And when I say alone, guys, I don't mean just, I'm not talking about like a social sense. I'm talking about how everybody is, I don't want to say stuck with their eyes, but they start in their own eyes. Everybody starts in their own eyes, right? And people have this notion that there's one fixed knowledge just because the outer realms was turned into a noun, you know. All that has happened on this planet is that eyes have went forth into the unknown. And I would say there are 4 kinds of solitude a person needs to accept. Ultimately 2, but there's a reason I'm saying 4. there is a solitude of the known self. So the person has to accept how much they know right now in this moment about themselves and their personal, you can say in their inner realms. So a person has to accept the eyes of their known self. A person then has to accept the eyes of the known world. So after you have noticed all that you know is in like the sphere of your intelligence, then you begin to see that all that is in the sphere of the intelligence of the world is also alone to itself. So it's as if like pretty much a human being needs to be like, okay, I'm a temporary object inside the universe, in the experience of the universe, and so one has to accept this. Then you realize the known world, you accept it, in the sense that, you know, they say 99.9% of species go extinct, but in reality, you know, it depends on how many dimensions this creature is in. If we're a multidimensional being, extinction is just a temporary setback, maybe. So we accept our attention in the known self, in the universe of the known self. We accept our attention in the universe of the known world. We accept our attention in the universe of the unknown self, and we accept our attention in the universe of the unknown world. That means pretty much we gotta accept ourselves and we gotta accept the world to be able to function, and others are just part of the world. So when you accept the world, you're actually indirectly accepting everyone. So once we're comfortable with an individual being alone in a universe, once we're comfortable with, in some sense, a civilization being alone in the universe, then we reach a point where we no longer have senses of self and civilizations, you know, or you can say worlds in a more general sense. It's as if it's the ultimate honor. We notice that the universe stands alone, hence why we call it universe. So the self, as part of the universe, realizes that it stands alone. You know, a person has to accept what they are in order to use it. And things that we accept, they become instantaneous, where we don't even have a concept on it. So what I mean by this is that everybody has accepted outer space. Every person has accepted gravity. You know, every person has accepted oxygen. We've managed to accept all these components to the universe alone, in a singular fashion. Now we have to accept ourselves. When we accept something, it's equivalent to opening the hood of a car. You get to see the engine. The ancient mystics would say there's two things you can pretty much do in life. You can trust life or distrust it. And if you trust life, it functions. Your consciousness rides the moment into its future. If you distrust it, the consciousness hasn't allowed itself the future. So you can say, if a person can become comfortable and content with their own solitude of consciousness in the universe, Pretty much we're a part of the universe. We are the small and the big. As the small and the big, we do feel, alone, I would say, even as a species. I mean, all the other species on this planet, they're like they're on another level. It's kind of like the human species is like, it either failed a grade, or it skipped ahead a grade. And what I mean by that is our intelligence surpasses other species that we feel we're alone. You see human beings talking to human beings. You don't see human beings like having a two-sided conversation with animals, And you know what's even more incredible? Animals probably have no conception of loneliness or solitude because they don't conceive themselves separate from the universe. Ideologically, in the same way the human being does, they cannot be alone, It's as if all of nature is happening at once. The only reason we feel, our separation with the universe, in the universe, it's like a drop or like an iceberg feeling alone in the ocean. But when the iceberg melts, it could never be alone. We are an energetic phenomena that is individualized. And this energetic phenomena, the moment the individuality, kind of like the iceberg, melts, we return to the ocean. So I would say the concept of just being alone in the universe, it's as if that whole concept is the universe. In order to build an advanced civilization, we pretty much need an advanced human being. An advanced human being is capable of, in some sense, going through or experiencing all possibilities in this reality. That means imagine a possibility where you have accepted the universe, your own solitude in the universe. Imagine a possibility where you haven't accepted your solitude in the universe. And so imagine, it's like the variations can go onwards. You can even fathom, in some sense, the universe accepting your individualism, or the universe not accepting your individualism. It's so bizarre, this life. It's as if if there is a God, this God created a world that is infinite, but the creatures on it can experience it for a little while, which makes me feel the universe wasn't built for humans. That means we are it's like, imagine entering civilization and you see an ant in the civilization. Okay, imagine you enter a downtown of a city, and so you see an ant on the street. Now, imagine you look at the ant on the street and you keep thinking, what does it have to do with civilization? And you see it's as if civilization is made for a completely different design. That means just like how somebody realizes civilization is made for human beings, not for ants, it's as if human beings are realizing the universe is not made for them. This would explain reality, If we think the universe is fine-tuned to only our perception, then we make our attention the God in the room. But I feel it's an act of great humility. Imagine an ant that can acknowledge a human civilization. That is literally such a leap of advancement. You know, there will come a time where our breath and our life may change. There may come a time where all that we know enters the unknown, and the unknown is an ultimate solitude. That means if we couldn't experience being with the universe and being alone in the universe, then in the known universe, that means it's as if we're in the conscious known part of life. And so if we can't accept the known universe, our solitude in the known universe, and we in some sense cannot be comfortable with our solitude in an unknown universe, we'll be even more freaked out, imagine. So what that means is human beings should have the courage to wonder about states where reality is not just limited to dualistic thinking. We should not fear the void. We should not fear the singularities of this realm, the singular meanings of this realm, singular events of this realm. We should not fear the dualistic in some sense, and even the infinite. These are all dimensions. And so Meister Eckhart says, the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. This Christian mystic says this from 1,000 years ago. And now imagine you are alone in the universe, and so you suddenly realize the same eyes you see the universe are the same eyes the universe sees you. That means in front of our eyes, human being looking at universe, behind our eyes, universe looking at human being. Hence why in certain yogic schools of thought, they said, somebody went up to this yogi pretty much, this enlightened guy, and he's like, yo man, show me God. And the person's like, all right. And the person's like, yeah, you're going to show me God? And the person's like, yeah. And he says, can you notice your ego? And the person's like, yeah, I can notice like how I have an ego. And he tells the person, you think the ego is moving itself. And he says, what do you think is moving the ego? That means behind all human knowledge, there is a greater unknown movement that we are riding the waves of. And so without the portal of solitude, there would be no way of discovering this. That means that you think of it this way, a pilot needs to pilot in various elevations. And so we're thinking of, all right, we want to pilot in this life. What are the elevations? When we go, some of the elevations take reality to its most simplest way. That means your solitude can be simple. You know, a person can make their loneliness the most complex thing, or a person can make their loneliness the most simple thing. You know, the context can be chosen. And really, we're just here to capture moments. Who are we kidding? The eyes of the human being are kind of like a camera. Now, we think our eyes are just perceiving this dimension, you know, but I will tell you, behind the eyes of man, the whole universe is looking through. This is why in yoga they would say, Satchidananda, conscious existence is bliss. When you realize existence and consciousness, or another modern way of saying this is energy and attention, are simultaneous. This means till the end of time, the subject and the object stand together. I would tell you honestly, it's as if we think traditional spirituality perceives that there's a body that has a mind, which is a soul. But it's kind of like there is a soul, and the body and mind are two dimensions, are its wings. The physical and the non-physical. The known and the unknown. These are wings of the collective truth. And any human being who can become comfortable with their solitude in an unknown universe and a known universe, you have surpassed even my voice in this talk. Because that is the ultimate aim. We think human beings actually need success in this life. Sure, there is outer realm success, but more important than that is the quality of how the being walks. Right? So imagine, in some sense, we are living in society, and how we talk is occupying our attention, but really it's the journey of the whole system. And I would say truth finds the graceful eyes first. You can say somebody wakes up, right? And they're like, oh my God, I'm alone in the universe. And somebody wakes up and is like, oh my God, I'm in a universe right now. You kidding me? Like, how incredible is that? Do you see what I mean? So it's like eventually the attention can move in so many ways that our suffering will be left behind in our multidimensional perception. And so, I would say that one sentence, which is the most important, life cannot die. That means energy cannot be destroyed. So we can never be alone. Because how can energy be alone? You see what I mean? It's as if it's as if what we think are people are actually, in some sense, is like the periodic table reincarnating as people. So in some sense, every cell of our body stands alone with a value, but the cells of the body work together, and there's a collective individuality. It's as if the cells of the body make up the human being, and human beings are going to make up the advanced civilization. And the difference in the advanced civilization and the human beings, we're going to become cells in the body of the future, pretty much, in the body of the future civilization. I would say this is probably like further than 2,000 years from now. And you know what the cool thing is about this life? Is that it starts with emptiness. Imagine it had started the other way around, where we had known everything, and bit by bit our knowledge would go away. But it starts from actually it being unknown and man exploring for knowledge. That means if the whole universe was known, there would be nothing to explore. There would be no need for human progress if there were limits on our world. Because it is limitless, it's as if endlessly man can advance. And so, Swami Krishnananda says, when you notice the inseparability of the individual activity and the cosmic activity, meditation stops. What he means there is that the moment you realize the individual that is feeling alone, experiencing itself alone, and the universe that is all being one giant happening of an event, when you notice that you are part of the universe can never be disconnected from itself, but the concept of man can. You see, so it's either we are people that are alone in the universe, or there's just a universe here and a part of it seems like people. And so the attention can move even beyond that. There's so many ways. I would like to go into a quote tunnel for the theme of solitude. Winston Churchill says, "Solitary trees, if they grow at all, grow strong." Albert Einstein says, "A table, a chair, a bowl of fruit, and a violin. What else does a man need to be happy?" Frank Miller says, "Sometimes the solitary voice can be the best one." Pablo Picasso says, "Without great solitude, no serious work is possible." Rumi says, "It's your road and yours alone. Others may walk it with you, but no one can walk it for you." Johann Wolfgang von Goethe says, "One can be instructed in society, one is inspired only in solitude." George Herbert says, "By all means use sometimes to be alone. Salute thyself, see what thy soul doth wear." Wow. See what thy soul doth wear. That means observe how your moment is being you know. Marcus Aurelius says, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than his own soul." Henry David Thoreau says, "I never found the companion that was so companionable as solitude." Thomas A. Edison says, "The best thinking has been done in solitude." Voltaire says, "The happiest of all lives is a busy solitude." This is so true, guys. I think this is really one of the most valuable things in life, where the human being has an aim. May Sarton says, "Loneliness is the poverty of self. Solitude is the richness of self." Arthur Schopenhauer says, "Great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude." Einstein says, "Be a loner. That gives you time to wonder, to search for truth. Have holy curiosity. Make your life worth living." Maxime Lagasse says, "Solitude helps you find peace. Peace helps you find happiness." Blaise Pascal says, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Albert Einstein says, "I have lived in that solitude which is painful in youth but delicious in maturity." Keanu Reeves says, "Once you know how to take care of yourself, company becomes an option." Goethe says, "Talent develops in quiet places, character in full current of human life." Louise Bourgeois says, "You are born alone, you die alone. The value of the space in between is trust and love." Edward Gibbon says, "Conversation enriches the understanding, but solitude is the school of genius." Cicero says, "I am never less alone than when alone." Charles Bukowski, "I was a man who thrived on solitude. Without it, I was like another man with food or water. Each day without solitude weakened me. I took no pride in my solitude, but I was dependent on it. The darkness of the room was like sunlight to me." Paul Tillich says, "Our language has wisely sensed the two sides of being alone. It has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and it has created the word solitude to express the glory of being alone." Buddha says, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." Bertrand Russell says a happy life must be to a great extent a quiet life, for it is only in an atmosphere of quiet that true joy can live. William Shakespeare says, I myself am best when least in company. And Aldous Huxley says, the more powerful and original a mind, the more it will incline towards the religion of solitude. Henry David Thoreau says, in proportion as a person simplifies his life, the laws of the universe will appear less complex and solitude will not be solitude. Nikola Tesla says the mind is sharper and keener in seclusion and uninterrupted in solitude. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. Franz Kafka says you do not need to leave your room. Remain sitting at your table and listen. Do not even listen, simply wait. Be quiet, still, and solitary. The world will freely offer itself to you to be unmasked. It has no choice. It will roll in ecstasy at your feet. Ayn Rand. In the temple of his spirit, each man is alone. Wow. That last sentence from Ayn Rand was incredible. Yeah, guys. So I guess a way of saying this is that solitude is we read it earlier, is the glory, of being alone, is a sort of, you can say solitude is not solitude when you're truly in solitude. It is union. I can tell you that these Mr.Within talks, when I think about it, it started at a point where somehow my psychology bypassed my desires for my cultural integration and to kind of go towards a sort of my social integration, to go more towards something new. You see, anytime we want to do something new, we can't be following the past. So if civilization, if society is based on the past, its systems are based on the past. In some sense, a human being has to step out of society like an eagle flying off from the branch and then come back to society with that new heightened view. So anyways, guys, I guess this is a short episode. I'll end it. Actually, in the subtitle, I've written two things. Meditation's aim is when through complete stillness and silence, you and the universe are inseparable, so their solitude becomes the realization of universal presence. I've also written in the subtitle, plus solution to 51% of suffering. So I thought about if we have a sort of solitude, in the inner realms, and a solitude in the outer realms. That means there's a world behind our eyes where we're alone in it, and there's a world in front of our eyes where we can be alone in it, but we can also not be alone in it, right? So if a person manages to, in some sense, accept themselves in this universe, which is pretty much being comfortable with your universal solitude, you in some sense have accepted the mind's position. So when you accept the mind's position, I'm trying to say that's like 51% in a kind of humorous way, in the sense that, like, when you see like two business partners, the one who has 51% makes the decision of the business, right? That has the final say. So it's kind of like when a person's mind, when your intelligent faculty, I shouldn't say faculty, but when you're intelligent, when you accept the solo presence of consciousness in the moment in existence, that's literally like half the coin accepted. So when you accept half the coin, the only thing left is to go to the other side, so it becomes 51%. Right? That means behind your eyes there's a union. That means the opposite of solitude, I would say, where you're not the opposite of solitude, but opposite of loneliness in some sense. There's a union with everything, and then there's being separate from everything. It's as if behind our eyes we're being the world and a separate self, and in front of our eyes where we are a biologically separate self in a world that the biological self is kind of extension of. Lorna says in the chat section, what if you raise your vibration so much you're still in this earth, but now you can see only the high vibrational things now, all low vibrational things are no longer. You see, if you see higher vibrational things, then there is no such thing as low vibrational, there is no such thing as high vibrational. What I mean by this is that it's kind of like when the drop is in the ocean, there is no drop. But in Tibetan Buddhism, they did have this concept of, this is an extreme thing to say from a cultural perspective, they had this idea of self-immolation, where some Vietnamese monks use that as a sort of cultural rebellion or revolutionary act. But then there's a way where they had this view that the yogi, in some sense, the meditator, that would be in such sync with all the universe that literally the energy in their body would amplify to such a point where they couldn't maintain a biological body. So in some sense, the being would transcend physical reality. That means your energy becomes way more than a biological body can contain. And when that happens, it's as if the body dismisses itself before the mind. You see, first of all, the first answer to all these metaphysical perspectives is we don't know. The second answer, which we have to use what we know to theorize, I would say, if there's higher dimensions, to me they are selfless. So you see, human psychology as a sphere is like one onion layer, and there's a greater onion layer that's above this, The greater onion layer is not a concept, and it's neither object or subject. So only if we're an individual object we can experience being alone, and only if there's a sort of subjective individual consciousness as well. Pretty much I'm saying if you're an iceberg, you're alone. If the iceberg melts, you could never technically be alone. To the yogi, existence is like a cinematic experience you didn't have to pay for. You just had to attend. And the greatest thing, I would say, to me, the greatest vision of enlightenment is you give what is given. And once you have given what was given, there is in some sense nothing else to give. So what that means is when a person fully experiences something, let's say you go to a restaurant, and once you've completely eaten your meal, you leave, right? And you can say if a human being has completely experienced the presence of their eyes and the presence of this dimension, you can say honorably one can pilot beyond conception. We not only need to be content with how we are alone in the universe and how we receive, but also how we express alone. And the species will experience loneliness until the inner child is accepted. That means every person has a memory of their youth. That memory of their youth creates a comparison point that if the person does something off, the conscience sets in. The conscience, you can say, is a memory trying to prevent the present from happening, from trying to prevent the present from entering the future. So, to study our own eyes means to study the origin of the universe, the origin of our own universe. And I would say that a complete contentment with universal solitude would just lead to pretty much a witness of the mind, the movements of the mind. So the body is an event and the mind is an event, and the watcher of these two events is that which in some sense cannot be lonely, but it alone exists. The personality can be alone in the presence of the universe, but the presence of the universe cannot be alone in the inner realms, in the personality of the person. That means the universe is being one event, and we are separate from it, considering it to be two events where the universe is happening, then we are happening. So beyond the idea of self, it's just world here. Beyond the idea of world, it could be just, either a superior self or it could just be ourself. Either way, the source of attention is the revolving door that is the exit and entrance of the universe. Anyways, guys, as Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says, whatever state I am in, I see it as a state of mind to be accepted as it is. Nature already knows, it's man who has forgotten. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. One more announcement I want to say. I may be taking some talks from the regular daily uploads. Take some time off to work on the bookstore, guys, so the talks may be less, but they will keep on coming. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening, and when we can accept ourselves and the world, we have accepted existence. And when attention can accept existence, there's nothing else to do. A freedom that can have no content. The freedom of freedoms. Thanks for listening. Namaste.